us. She's a, thank you.
Sorry.
We have to have that. Jackie's running away and escaping from NHACD and going into the family business. So we are in the process of interviewing people next week, next Tuesday and Thursday. If you know of anybody who might be interested in being our program manager, Ian, you've got half just threw that out. You know, the other half of graduate school, SCC, and us would make a pretty full day. So we're working on that. We've got the regional conference coming up November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. We are looking for a deadline on registration of October 20th. So if any of your districts have supervisors that haven't signed up yet, we are going to pay their registration and hotel up until if they register before the 20th. After the 20th, they're on their own. So
the deadline for the hotel registration is the 10th.
Is the 10th, which is 4 days from now.
It's the 11th. The deadline for hotel room block is the 11th.
Okay.
Sorry.
And
That's
then
okay.
you can, well, you can still get a room at regular rates, not the group rate.
Correct.
They'll sell you a room at any price after that. So those are, anybody else have any news? The foliage is wonderful in the north. Pam gave that report earlier tonight. I'm going to Maine for the next 4 days up around Bangor. So I hope to have a good viewing up there. Any other news? Donna, any SCC news? Ian, any SCC news you want to share? None?
Yeah, I can speak about that for just a second, unless
Okay.
Donna wants to jump in. Yeah, still plenty of action going on. Continuing to make strides on the strategic planning efforts. We're going to have a few meetings coming up about that, and then hopefully develop into a broader partner workshopping. So we've got some self-discovery aspects to do before we start including the conservation districts and the CDEA and other partner organizations. So that is in the works. It's something that we're working heavily on. And yeah, mostly just that. And the other big thing is moose plates. Right now, the committee that handles moose plates is in consideration, and we'll be meeting on that in November to make final decisions on that before our November meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're going to move on to Grafton County's in the spotlight this month, and Pam Gilbert is their district manager. Pam grew up in Chazy, New York. She remembers conservation field days at the Minor Farm and elementary school, and was especially interested in the forestry and wildlife sessions. So that motivated her to go on to Paul Smith's college with an associate's degree in forestry, and then she moved to New Hampshire. She was a bookkeeper for Wagner Woodlands and O'Brien Forestry Services before joining Grafton County Conservation District. She's been the district manager there for 20 years. Working with a board of supervisors and conservation partners is rewarding and ever-changing as new research and technology evolve. So Pam, fill us in on Grafton County Conservation District.
Okay, I'm going to see if I'm screen sharing.
You are.
Excellent. Everyone can see that? Grafton County, this is an older map. but it has, there are 40 towns, which keep us pretty busy. We're definitely more active in the Connecticut River watershed and the Baker River watershed, but it's a pretty big place. Tonight, I'm mostly going to talk about the Beebe River Aquatic Habitat Restoration Project. Let's see. We were approached by Trout Unlimited and New Hampshire Fish and Game to act as the fiscal agent for a New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Aquatic Resources Mitigation Grant. We were interested in partnering. We hadn't done it, so we thought we'd give it a try. The project was selected for funding by the DES ARM Committee and approved by Governor and Council in spring 2021. The project addresses aquatic fragmentation and flood risks in the Beebe River watershed at 2 sites. Ryan Brook has a crossing on Perch Pond Road and then an unnamed tributary on Eastern Corner Road in Campton. The project will remove existing undersized perched culverts, and those will be replaced with open span bridges. The stream bed will be rebuilt following that and using the U.S. Forest Service stream simulation protocol and restore in-stream habitat suitable for brook trout and other cold water fish. For 5 years after the construction phase, there will be annual monitoring at the 2 sites performed by DES, Fish and Game, Plymouth State University, and the Pemigewasset chapter of Trout Unlimited. They are going to collect genetic samples and compare them to existing genetic samples from an isolated population upstream of the Eastern Corner Road culvert. This is a picture at the Ryan Brook one. There are actually 2 culverts there, and they are not functioning very well. Construction started this week on dewatering the site, and they electrofished to move the existing fish in the work site below, and they are starting, hopefully this week, it's underway to remove the old culverts and replace the bridge. The Eastern Corner Road one is on conserved property owned by the Conservation Fund. And one of the Moose Plate grant applications is to fund a bridge to replace the culvert that you see perched there. As I mentioned, there's been some genetic sampling done of an isolated wild brook trout population above that culvert. So they're eager, once the connectivity is restored, to collect more genetic samples. These bridges are going to provide multi-use public access, improve aquatic connectivity and water quality, provide wild brook trout access to thermal refuge and spawning habitat, and add stability to the stream bed and banks. Other things we've done this year, we did attend an ice cream social with the Grafton County Farm Bureau at Townsend Farm in Lebanon in June. It was a really nice day, and it was kind of surprising. A lot of farmers came out to spend some time and listen to the Farm Bureau. We also participated in a cover crop demonstration project here at the Grafton County Farm. They did not have inmate labor to operate the farm stand as usual, so they took advantage of the opportunity and grew several varieties of cover crops, and had a meeting in September for over 30 farmers attended to look at the different cover crops and see how they were performing. And then at the end of September, we had a nice workshop up in the Grafton County Forest. The picture doesn't look that dynamic. It was a really rainy day, so you can still see some color and stuff. This was, I think, September 29th. But again, we had a good landowner turnout for over 2 hours on a rainy afternoon. So we felt good about that. Other things we've done, in June, we were able to participate in the Grafton County Farm Bureau Ag in the Classroom Ag Day, and this was at the Haverhill Cooperative Middle School. Supervisors participated and talked to the kids about the importance of New Hampshire soils. And they did an activity comparing earth as an apple and also discussed pollinators. Some other projects that are ongoing right now, the Upper Valley Land Trust Regional Conservation Partnership Program works with farmers and farmland owners interested in conserving their farmland. There is a target area in Grafton and Sullivan County. So we try and include them and have a lot of outreach events talking about conservation practices and farmland conservation. New this year, we are working on a transition to grazing for dairy farms project. That is with some Vermont conservation districts. They have hired a coordinator for the project, and Bill Focher is assisting in New Hampshire. We have one farm in Grafton County that is interested in participating. I contacted 15 dairy farms, and they're all in the Connecticut River watershed in Grafton County. And I think that most of those farms have kind of done what they can at this point in time to include grazing in their programs, but we're really happy when one farm signed up to do the whole session. You get, you work with a mentor farmer, and there's workshops on every farm so farmers can learn about different practices. In the winter, we had a High Tunnels 101 virtual workshop, and that went on for 5 evenings with COAS in Carroll County and COAS, Carroll and Grafton County Cooperative Extension and NRCS. And that was really well attended over the 5-week period. We also were a sponsor for Stories from the North, which was a project by Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition and the Littleton Food Co-op. And in the Northeast Kingdom, North Country of New Hampshire. Along with New Hampshire and Vermont Conservation Districts, we were sponsors on the Hydropower Happy Hour. And also we had our local work group this year in July. Coming up next week, we are going to have a little meet and greet gathering to present our Legacy Award to Dick and Ann Fabrizio, Windy Ridge Orchard in North Haverhill. And also we have a supervisor that's been on the board for 56 years, Dick McDaniels, and we're going to have a little appreciation for Dick. So we're looking forward to that. Our eco drill has had a lot of inquiries again for use and quite a few rentals. It's an older piece of equipment now. So our chair, Gary Peters, has given a lot of hours maintaining that drill and going over usage of it with the renters. So that has been a good program. And we also have an airway aerator available for rent. Does anyone have any questions?
I'm amazed at the diversity that you have to have as a manager to deal with hydroelectric plants, corn planters, field seeders, trout. It's like, how do you get there?
Well, a lot of ideas come from the board and obviously other conservation districts around us in New Hampshire and Vermont. And that is a big benefit of having close working relationships with other conservation districts. Very supportive, especially in the Connecticut River Valley. The hydropower happy hours, that is related to the relicensing of Bellows Falls, Vernon dams. So there's a lot of outreach going on there so that people are aware of the relicensing process.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you very much, Pam. We've recorded this for posterity. And, you know, I go back to my district and say, how come we're not doing this? So Vicky's having a rough time with Chris and I because we're always coming back saying, this district's doing this. But there's only so many hours in the day to do things.
That is true. And, you know, when you find a really new or different project, it's kind of, you know, big learning curve to get up and start thinking about how that might work in your county.
Learning is good. That's why I like hosting this, because I'm always finding something new that, you know, there's no rust up here right now.
Pam, what kind of rental equipment do you have besides the two no-till planters?
That is it. We are, that's a really challenging program. Our eco drill is smaller. It's 6 feet wide. And so it's really great for irregular shaped or uneven terrain, small pastures, small farms, but a lot of them don't have the farmer insurance that our insurer requires. We need to get a certificate of insurance from them. So it's kind of a tough spot because it's a great piece of equipment, but there are barriers for people using it. But it has been, you know, outside of Grafton County this summer a couple times, or early fall, late summer. And there is a lot of interest in it. We're lucky that the Connecticut River Watershed Farmers Alliance just bought a small, not the same kind of drill, but also a small no-till drill available for rental on both sides of the river. So that helps, you know, if somebody from Jaffrey wants to use it, it might be that other organization's drill is more available. Ours has had a few setbacks with waiting for parts, even minor parts like bearings and things are hard to get this summer. So, you know, it's going well. We think it's a really good service. We're still questioning whether it's the best fit for us.
Anyone else?
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Pam. An impressive
you.
impressive operation in the north. I'd like to introduce Corey Riley now. This is the second time I've had her on a show. She was on our Zoom in on Rockingham County about 6 months ago. She's with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and she's responsible, or she's involved with buffers for the bay. We have two conservation planners on tonight, Corey, that are working all around the state. And I was really impressed with how you dealt with buffers 6 months ago. So I'm really happy that they're able to hook up with you this evening. So they'll reveal themselves as time goes on, I'm sure. So I will turn the floor over to you, and we don't have a time limit tonight, so you can talk all you want.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen and then I'm going to confirm in a minute that you can all see it. So let me just make sure can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and so here we go. So my name is Corey Riley, and I actually work for New Hampshire Fish and Game, and I'm the manager of a partnership between New Hampshire Fish and Game and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and it's called the Great Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. So that's a mouthful. And I'm going to tell you about a project that we completed in 2018-19 and started in 2016. So some of it is a little dated right now, but I think the concepts and the resources are still going to be valuable. Just for some context, this is where I work. This is Great Bay. And even though my talk is about Great Bay, I think that the ideas that I'm going to present are really, they're pretty systematic throughout anywhere there's water bodies. You know, it's a lot of the same challenges, and buffers are a solution to those challenges in lots of different environments. I happen to be in a tidal environment, but a lot of these concepts are applicable regardless of whether there's a tide there or not. And the background context is in the I guess between 2014 and 2018, I was engaged in 3 sort of efforts in coastal New Hampshire that pointed out declines in the health of the estuary and in the surrounding habitat. So one is the State of Our Estuary Indicator Summary that the Piscataqua Region Estuaries Partnership puts out. And they have indicators of environmental health that they track through time. And the 2015 Wildlife Action Plan. And then the New Hampshire Coastal Risk and Hazards Commission, which took place basically in 2014, but then they updated the science in 2019. So since I was participating in all 3 of these large efforts, and all of them pointed to a loss of habitat, declining water quality, and increased flooding. I felt like some responsibility to kind of do something about these trends that we were seeing, especially because I'm responsible for a program that has some management interest or authority or ownership over 7,000 acres of tidal land and of underwater or tidal land and over 2,500 acres of upland. So I felt responsible, like I should figure this out. I should figure out how my program can be a part of the solution. And really, we have a lot of different issues that we need to address when it comes to where land and water interface. We want to promote water quality, reduce erosion, reduce flood risk, and promote fish and wildlife habitat. So when you think about one thing that can do all of these, can really help provide ecosystem services in all these ways, you go back to my picture and you look at all the trees and you say, wait, there is something we could do. And that's how we landed on buffers. So I was in a meeting in 2015 with the director of the New Hampshire chapter of the Nature Conservancy and the Watershed Bureau administrator for DES and our New Hampshire Conservation Law Foundation folks and the Piscataqua Regional Estuary Partnership. And we all kind of said, well, what could we do that would really make a difference in Great Bay? And all of us said, well, if there was only a way to sort of protect it and buffer it. And so then I felt responsible again, like, well, I should do something. This is like, I feel responsible. So I said, I'm gonna dig in and I'm gonna do a project around buffers. And I applied for a grant through a funding opportunity called the Near Science Collaborative, which is a partnership between NOAA and the University of Michigan. And the purpose of our grant was, as you can read here, to enhance the capacity of New Hampshire stakeholders to make informed decisions about buffer restoration and protection in the Great Bay region. And the type of grant was called an integrated assessment. So it wasn't like hypothesis-driven research. We were specifically looking to pull together existing information. And the first thing we had to do was, as a group, define what we meant by enhanced capacity. And so this is what our project team came up with. And this is a good time to state that our project team consisted of biophysical scientists, GIS mappers and modelers. We had land analysis folks, economists, a lawyer. So it's a really diverse group of people that actually did the work for the project. And then we also had a very large advisory committee that had 15 organizations. And so even just getting to a common definition of what we wanted when we said enhanced capacity was difficult to just narrow down what this big group of people meant. And this is what we came up with. We thought that in New Hampshire, buffers would be enhanced if everybody had access to information that everyone trusted. If people in communities and who work with communities understood the value of buffer protection, that also includes, regulators and legislators. And if we had a clear and well-coordinated regulation framework that everybody understood, and if people were continually using the best available science. So basically this graphic shows what an integrated assessment is supposed to do. And we're supposed to be clarifying the issue, defining what the barriers are, trying to figure out different options, and developing information guides. And throughout the whole process, we need to touch base with different stakeholders. So that's where our advisory committee came in. I will say that we did a lot of work, and you'll see, to summarize the best available information, but we did not propose a solution. This is exactly what everybody should do. We pulled the information together and tried to synthesize it in a way where people could access it and understand it very clearly. This is harder to do than you think with a group of scientists, because scientists say, oh, we're not going to tell you what to do. But what they really mean is they don't want to be responsible for the decision, but they do want to tell you what to do. And we had so many different types of scientists on this project that it really was a continual process of everybody learning to listen and learning to accept other perspectives on this really complicated topic. So this is just a quick slide to talk about how we did integrate different stakeholders. We did a lot of interviews and surveys to assess community values and barriers associated with buffer management. So we did over 38 interviews with people in 4 communities along one sub watershed within Great Bay. We had scientific peer reviews to make sure that the science that we produced was well trusted. So we had people from inside our state and outside of our state make sure that what we put forward in this project was good science and good information. As I said, we had an active engagement committee and advisory committee that just kept us on task the whole time. And we had 2 public comment meetings. We really wanted to make sure that everything about this project was transparent and that everybody who wanted to be involved had a chance to help us with the project. So in the end, what we had for products is, and I'm going to show you the website because that's probably going to be what's most useful to you. But we also had a series of reports and maps that we created. So we had a literature review of the best available science related to buffers, a policy analysis, a legal summary that related to the takings. We had a community assessment that synthesized all the interviews that we did and gave tips on how to engage communities if they're interested in working on buffers. And that was really for technical assistance type of organizations. We created maps for each community in the coastal watershed, all 42 towns. We did 2 economic type studies. One was a willingness to benefit transfer, willingness to pay study. And then the other one was a literature review around sort of the economic benefits of protecting buffers or trade-offs. And finally, we created an action plan for what as a community we should do next related to this topic. So I'm just going to highlight the key points from each of those products and then show you the website. So the literature review really reviewed the most current sort of peer-reviewed literature about buffers that's out there and summarized that. It's a pretty long report. It's maybe 30 or 40 pages. But in a nutshell, it really talks about how you can, I mean, the key issue everybody wants to know is how wide should a buffer be? So it looked at that question in a couple of different ways. And basically, as with everything, it depends, right? It depends on what value you're trying to protect. Is it water quality? Is it wildlife habitat? Because those require different buffer widths to support. It can depend on how valuable your community sees that particular resource and what they value it for. Do they value it for recreation? Do they value it as a drinking water site? And finally, there are site-specific conditions that really play into how well a buffer performs all of these ecosystem services. And in particular, like the soil and the slopes have a lot to do with the water quality purification available for a buffer and also some of the habitat values. So the kind of choices that you have to make are, do we want to just pick one number and go with it everywhere and say, well, that's better than nothing? That's pretty defensible. And if you were, we said 100 feet is a sort of minimum target that people should be shooting for if they want to take that approach. We also looked at different types of ways to frame it around resource values, or as I said, sort of soils and slopes. There are different approaches for each of those. This is just one of the graphics that we created that kind of summarizes what we found in the literature review as far as protecting different types of values with different buffer widths. So as you can see, for wildlife habitat, it really should be, over 300 feet. And for protecting water temperature, maybe it's a brook trout stream, 30 feet. So it ranges depending on what values you're interested in looking at. And another thing we looked at is there a way to map where the most valuable buffer resources are in the watershed? And so we used a lot of existing geospatial information that was already out there. And these maps were created by the Nature Conservancy. And we looked at both single benefits of buffers, so where they were the most likely to provide flood protection or wildlife habitat or water quality benefits. And then, as you can see from the slide, we also looked at different combinations of multiple benefits and sort of overlaid already conserved land. So a town could take a look and say, oh, I can see that, a place where we really need to focus some concentrated effort because there are multiple benefits. This is an example in Durham, is over by the Madbury town line near the bridge. That's a place where we really should be thinking about our buffers. Or if we're interested in water quality, we really should be looking up the Johnson Creek watershed, for example. So these maps were created town by town And they're all on the website as PDFs. This was something that was specifically asked for by the stakeholders that we worked with. They said, you can give us a GIS tool, and there is a tool on Granite for this, but what we really need are the maps so that we can hand them out in a meeting. So another thing we looked at is we really kind of tried to synthesize the interviews and the information that we got from people who are on local conservation commissions or planning boards and who are responsible for local regulations. And this is not going to be surprising to any of you, but the bottom line is that there are always competing values at the community scale. And the big ones that we pulled out were trade-offs between buffer conservation and economic growth. People felt like it was just too hard and they had to make a choice between one or the other. And also just trade-offs reflected in competing community values. There are a lot of towns in New Hampshire that are proud of their rural character and want to maintain that. And they really feel strongly about property rights at the same time. And so it's hard to preserve your rural character intentionally if you never want to tell people what to do with their property. So, you know, all of those, I mean, it's familiar, I think, with any community work. Trade-offs were, you know, things that local decision makers brought up as real challenges for working with buffers. And one of the things that group did, who was looking at these community barriers and challenges, is they sort of came up with a conceptual model for what factors are most important when you're working in a community to make sure that people feel informed about buffers and trust the science and understand that you're respecting what those community values are as you start to talk to people. So they came up with sort of like a little tool and some guidance for anybody who is a community leader or works with an organization that wants to try to promote stronger buffers in policy or ordinances in their community. Another few scientists on the team took a look at some of the economic benefits and trade-offs. And one of the studies is called a benefits transfer study of willingness to pay. And the willingness to pay is basically how much would people pay to avoid a decline in water quality. So it's a little bit backwards the way to think about it, but it's basically to maintain the water quality that we have and not see it slide backwards. And the team looked at this. They used local water quality data and changes in local water quality data and local census information, but they sort of transferred some of the variables from other studies that were done around the country. So this was not a local survey that they did, but they have a algorithm basically of how they bring economic data that's collected through surveys in other places and make it relevant to New Hampshire. And these point increases are based on like sort of an EPA water quality scale that was out of 100 points. And as you can see, I mean, the big takeaway is the closer you were to Great Bay, the more you cared about water quality. And that's probably because of the impairments that DES had determined the Great Bay was impaired for nitrogen. And so it was in the news a lot, basically. But if you averaged it across all of these different sort of regional takes, it was a lot of money. It was, you know, kind of depending on the range. It was $1.5 to $2.9 million annually was the willingness to pay to of the costs and benefits of protecting buffers. And, you know, a big takeaway from this is probably a similar takeaway that you would have in any sort of thorough literature review for sort of a community policy, which is that there are winners and losers, and that the people who live, who own land that you might regulate to keep a wider buffer lose value because they lose usable space or options for what they can do with their land, or they lose a view. But the distributed benefits across a community far outweigh the loss to an individual. So it kind of comes down to a question of, you know, sort of macroeconomics and how do you balance, do you maximize benefits within a community or within a state, or do you protect the benefits of individuals? So the study also had different kind of examples of different studies that had looked at maintenance costs and looked at the benefits of being near conservation land or recreation land. So it's an interesting study to dig into just to see some of the different ways people have approached this topic in sort of the socioeconomic realm. We also did a policy analysis, and what we wanted to do, we had two purposes for this. One was to sort of summarize how things are done in New Hampshire now and lay that out really clearly and make sure that we could explain that to everybody, and everybody had sort of a really clear idea, which I think most of you know, that sort of the state regulations surrounding buffers are not real aggressive, but municipalities can make them stronger if they choose to. So that leads to a bit of a patchwork around the state of what the buffer regulations are in a particular community and what the motivations are. It's not always done by Streamwater, even though the state sort of baseline is done according to Streamwater. So we looked at how we do things in New Hampshire, and we also looked at what some examples from different places around the country are. So we did a case study and wrote up a case study for how Vermont handles buffers, in particular, the way they do big river buffers and what they call the meandering, I guess it's the meander belt of a big river and how they preserve that. And we looked at Rhode Island, and they have sort of a different approach to buffers based on sort of how far up watershed you are and how densely populated the area is. So it's not one size fits all. And then Washington State has a really complicated buffer policy where you basically have you have all these different factors that go into it, and they kind of calculate a score for what your buffer width should be based on all of those factors. So kind of a range of different kind of options from other places. As a part of that, we also just explored a little bit what some of the non-regulatory options are for protecting buffers. So that was, direct conservation, tax incentives, easements, and creative sort of easement programs, and potentially even trading. I mean, that was sort of a hypothetical, but we wanted to just sort of start talking about what could some other options be besides regulation. And then finally, the group really did dig into an action plan of like, what would we like to do more on this topic, where we had all of the organizations on the advisory committee kind of sign up and say, well, that's something I'd be interested in. And we did a prioritization exercise, and that led to a few other grants that we were able to pursue to advance a couple of these topics. I will say that some of the information in this original analysis has been updated, or we might use updated information if we reran it, if we had like a little boost and kind of rebooted the information that we have. But overall, I think most of the information that I'm going to show you on the website is still relevant. So that's kind of what I would like to do next, is just give you a little bit of a tour of the website. So I'm going to switch what I'm sharing and see if I can get to my computer. Hold on. Can you see the buffers options for the Bay website right now? Yeah, okay, great. So I just want to give you a quick tour. And if you want, you can just write down the title here, bufferoptionsnewhampshire.org or nh.org. And this was our way, everything I just summarized is in this report section. And some of the reports are very long and detailed and academic. And so we wanted to synthesize all of this information that we gathered around buffers in a way that would be useful to people. And so we created this website. And the way it's organized is you can read a little bit about the project, but we have these different sections to the websites. There's buffer basics, which is, you can see here, what is a buffer? What do they do? How well do they work? How do people value buffers? And for any of these, what you can do is you can click to expand this, and it'll get you a page, and you can read the text, or you can download this PDF. And that way it can be a handout. We had a lot of feedback from our stakeholders that said some people are going to want web resources, but some people who work at the local level, it's really going to be helpful to have, one or two pages. So we structured most of the website in a way that things can be downloaded as handouts, if that's helpful to the audiences that you're working with or the people that you work with on a regular basis. And so the buffer basics, as I said, is really kind of like, how do they work? How wide should they be? What's the definition of a buffer, etc. And then we have this section that's really geared towards, how do you actually implement these things? So how to work with communities, how to work with landowners, and how to navigate regulations. So in the how to work with communities section, it's similarly laid out where there are these boxes that you can click and you can dig into a subtopic if you want to. So how do you start a conversation? Where are they? Which links back to the mapping page. What are the options for protecting them? So that goes through sort of the regulatory and non-regulatory options. And in this sort of, we have a couple case studies of how to restore a buffer, and we have a resource list of organizations that can help. So again, we have a similar sort of layout for how to work with landowners and how to navigate regulations. I will say that for this group, that the landowner section is not as specific to the agricultural community as buffer work in other states is, because in the Seacoast watershed, not as many of the buffer work that we would be doing was with agricultural audiences. USDA was a part of the, NRCS was a part of our project team, and has helped kind of to take a look at those maps and use that in their own sort of processes. But I just want to acknowledge that up front, that the landowner piece is not as heavy on ag as it would be if we were doing this project in a different place. So I just really wanted to show you the maps really quick. So this is where you can download the maps for each community. I know that not everybody on this call lives in a coastal community, and it goes pretty far up watershed. So we have different types of, we have buffers for water quality, wildlife action plan, kind of corridors, flood storage, and then where there are co-occurrence maps. And it's all done by town. So you can get a map of just the buffer is important to water quality or wildlife, or you can go all the way over to the right and get a map that shows you all of the co-occurring benefits on one map. And then it's just listed alphabetically, and people can kind of cruise through and see which maps are most valuable. And then just finally, I'll just show you the reports page. Like I said, these are really kind of, some of them are hefty documents because we really dug in as far as, I think the community assessment is 100 pages. The coastal science literature review, I think, is 60 pages. But some of them are a little bit more easy to read. So the takings executive legal summary or fact sheet are good. There's like this synthesis of policy options, the economic assessment. So we have a lot of sort of like reports that people could dig into if they were interested in a subtopic related to buffers. And that's really all I wanted to show you today. My big goal is that people know this website is out here because we did do a lot of work to contribute to it. And it's a goal of ours to try to keep it maintained and up and running over time. So as I said, I know that you're not all from coastal areas, but I really do think that buffers are this universal tool, and it doesn't require an advanced degree in engineering or modeling or, a huge, kind of crazy budget to implement. It's really about protecting what we already have and not trying to restore it later, but being more proactive about recognizing the benefits that they provide. So I'm going to stop sharing. And then see if the other thing I'm going to do right now is I'm going to write my contact information and that website address in the chat so people have that. But please let me know if you have any questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Sarah McGrath Small, and I'm the newest planner for NHACD. And I'm working statewide, but I'm based in where I live in Nottingham. Out of Epping. So I'll definitely be interested once I learn more and once I get more into my role about how I can kind of provide this information to people that I talk to, which will be great.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the, what was that tool you were talking about for community leaders?
Yeah, so it's basically if you work in communities, and that will lay out different sections in that one-page format. If you go to the reports, you can go to the community assessment, and that's the full document that sort of summarizes the interviews that we did. We also sent out a survey to the whole watershed and goes into a little bit more depth about advice on how to approach talking about buffers within a community. So that report might be the more helpful piece because it's more detailed. Maybe start with how to work with communities.
Great. Thank you.
This is
So
Tom
Corey,
Jones.
what is your current focus right now with carrying this material and information forward?
Yeah, so what we, as an organization, what we did is we held a few workshops the first year or so after this was released. And we had like 2 that were on buffers in general with local conservation commission groups and the Seacoast Conservation Commissions. We also had one that was specific to the takings issue because it generated a lot of interest in our area. And then we applied for a grant because a lot of people said within the community said that one of the key values of buffers that might help elevate it as an issue is if it could be basically credited by EPA as a stormwater runoff best practice. So we applied for a grant and did some work to see if we could quantify the benefits as a removal rate for nitrogen, sediment, and phosphorus, which turned out to be kind of complicated for natural buffers, but we came up with numbers for restored or planted buffers. So those are a couple of things that we've done recently. We have a coastal training program coordinator, so that's a person that works a lot with our local decision makers, and we have a new person who's maybe hoping to take a look at this and think about if we could modularize it and come up with either like a video or a set of slides that we could deliver and also distribute to people to deliver who are interested in the topic. Did you have something specific in mind that you thought would be helpful?
I know, I was just interested in next steps. I've worked with estuaries in other areas, so.
Yeah. I'll also say that this model seemed to work well where we presented both maps and content on a website so people could find it all in one place. And we're hoping to do a similar model to roll out the updated coastal conservation plan that TNC just completed. So that's sort of a parallel project that's starting up now that we hope to use a similar model for. Tom, did you have a question as well?
Yes, Corey, thank you. I came out of North Carolina in the late 90s when we had nitrogen reduction regulations passed for agriculture in certain river basins. Spoke in your presentation about the burden on landowners. And I'm not sure if you mentioned it, I missed it, or if you all did address that our perspective in North Carolina was that if it was the public that wanted the water quality improved, then the public, as well as the landowner, need to partner in one, telling the landowner how to do what they need to do, and some cost. At least some cost sharing involved. We had a $10 million a year program for cost sharing for those things for agriculture. Is that involved in your studies?
So if you dig into some of the reports in there about like kind of existing ways to dig into this, for agriculture, there are great, ways to compensate farmers for taking, land out of use or planting buffers. It's not as easy for like suburban development. And so we did talk a lot about that, like, could there be incentive programs where you pay people? And when we talked to community members and state folks about that, they said, well, geez, that would be really expensive to administer. And in particular, it's hard to enforce. So the enforcement piece is the key on private land was the part that kept coming up, just that local communities, most of them don't have a conservation agent. if they have somebody who is doing that type of enforcement work, it's often a building inspector. So it's somebody who is doing a lot of different enforcement work for a community. And then that was one of the real gaps for, kind of thinking through how to do this. So you have to kind of find people who are willing to do this, and support them. And so that was a little piece of it too, is like, how do you find the landowners that want to do this and incentivize it for them? Because the enforcement part, I don't know, we didn't really figure it out. And I think it's an issue for a lot of environmental issues in New Hampshire, to be honest.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Richard?
Yes, Corey, and regarding the economics, you had a slide with the green, different color greens for the graph. Indicate the willingness to pay for water quality. But I wasn't sure, first of all, what the different percentages really represented, and in particular, what those costs were actually a cost of, what expenses were utilized or proposed for water quality. So
Yes.
explain that a little better if you could.
I'll try. This is one of those things where when we were writing the proposal, we said, this is an important part of this, is the policy context, the ecological context, and we should figure out how people value water quality. And so we went to an economist who has a great reputation from Clark University. His name's Rob Johnson. He's done a lot of these studies around willingness to pay for environmental benefits. And what it's based on is a survey where people they choose between different trade-offs. Like, would you pay this much in taxes? Would you forego this much in, I don't know, revenue? And it has like each person fills out a survey, and the questions are slightly different for each person, or every 10th person. It's something like that. It's a sampling regime where people are asked similar questions on the survey, and that allows them to calculate like what the average person in that region would pay to maintain water quality. So it's usually a question like, would you pay an additional X dollars in taxes or fees or sticker to keep water quality steady in your community? So it's based on surveys, but he didn't do the surveys in New Hampshire, which is the confusing part. And there is a method, it's called benefits transfer for economic analysis. And they basically take studies that are done in similar places, and they use an algorithm that takes our water quality data, and the change in what people were willing to pay had to do with like a scale of 1 to 10 for water quality. Very clean, very swimmable to looks gross. And so on the surveys, they would like show people pictures of the difference or give examples of what you could do in a dirty body of water and a clean body of water. And then, so that's how they help tease that scale out and apart. And basically they take these original surveys that have been done, and I think he used something like 50 or 40 different surveys that were done in different parts around the country. And then they kind of import them to New Hampshire and add in our local context to through an equation, basically. So if you're interested in that, there is a full paper, like a scientific paper on it, on that reports page. It's kind of confusing though, to be perfectly honest. So at the end of it, and it was kind of expensive to pay him to do this, I said, okay, well, what's the bottom line? And the bottom line was that people are willing to pay money to avoid a decline in water quality. That people do value, water quality, and that they care about it both for the rivers and for the bay. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question perfectly, but there is a detailed explanation of the method in that report section.
Andrea Moreau from New Hampshire Lakes 11 years ago told me that for every meter loss of clarity in a water body, the value of the property goes down 8%.
Yeah, and in estuaries, it was really interesting to do this in a coastal environment because water clarity is one of the things that people can see. And so they know if a water body is clean or not. Basically, they think it's clean or they don't think it's clean based on if it's clear. And water is never clear in an estuary. It's always kind of mucky looking. So it's been interesting to do this type of work in an estuary because I think it's just a little bit different. But yeah, those are good questions. Okay, well, I hope you get a chance to check out the website and I hope it's useful to all of you in some way. So feel free to contact me if you have any follow-up questions later.
This has
Thank you
been
very much.
very, very helpful.
Sure.
And I don't know where to begin, but I got to begin someplace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very
Sure.
much.
Yeah, nice to meet you all.
Well, I will close out for the night. I'll see a lot of you November 1st. I hope you're going to make our regional meeting. And good night to all. Thank you, Corey.
You're welcome. Good
Thank
night.
you. Thank you, Pam.
Thanks, Dick. Thanks, everybody.